Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Nina Ahmad, who will tell us about her spring plans, and our own Lance Haver will provide an update on SEPTA. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Some bad news, some worse news, and some hopeful news about SEPTA. And I know those of us who are football fans are hoping that Chris Murray will join us next week to talk a little bit about what's going to happen at the Super Bowl and what the new coaches for the Eagles may mean or may not mean.
I need to know that information about the new coaches. Otherwise, it's going to be a very long off season. So go ahead, Lance.
Well, I'm just hoping Chris will be able to join us. We'll have to ask him on. I know he has a new book out, and it's very exciting for him. He's doing a lot of talking about his book. But hopefully he'll find the time to share with us who are those people that they hired. Can that coach, the offensive coordinator, look any younger? Is it possible? Can he really be more than 25 years old? I think the answer is yes, but he certainly doesn't look it.
Well, we're going to see. It couldn't be any worse than how the season ended. So we'll look forward to that. And tonight, we're going to speak with Councilmember Nina Ahmad, who is a freshman council member just sworn in on January 2nd, less than a month on the job. So here is her explaining a little bit about how she views the job and what her top priorities are. Here is our interview with Nina Ahmad. All right, Councilmember, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So the first thing I have to ask you, what made you want to run for office?
So when I think back at the start of me understanding the role of people's voices and how they're governed is because of my lived experience as a child, of living through a war. There's a whole new country formed because people fought for freedom and independence. And that experience and the sacrifice people made has never left me, ever. That is a guiding, sort of grounding experience in my life. And when I think about inequities, and when I came here to this country and saw in the first world country so much inequity, that I felt moved to say, what can I do? Where can I have the most impact? And this is why I ran for this seat. I've run for other things before, and I had, looked at the Auditor General race. I had won the primary, and I thought that that was a space for me to look at, how resources are allocated and how we could have some change in that, and accountability and transparency. And while I didn't win the general, I won the primary. I took that experience and saw that Philadelphia was much maligned in the state of Pennsylvania, even though Philadelphia is the driver of Pennsylvania's economy. And that got me thinking that we need to change that paradigm, that even though we are bringing so much to the state, yet when I went to the remaining 66 counties, I didn't see that level of appreciation for Philadelphia. So putting that all together, when there were open seats on city council, I felt that this is where I could be the public servant I wanted to be, and also make change and really look at how we bring equity into the landscape of Philadelphia.
You're absolutely right about the way the rest of the state views Philadelphia. So how do you prepare for the role of being a freshman council member? Excuse me.
So one, I've been a deputy mayor before and been on the other side, on the executive side. I was a deputy mayor when Jim Kenney first started as mayor in 2016. And I actually started a department where there was none, Office of Public Engagement, within which were different offices. So I had a sense of how you need to structure things in order for work to happen. And then prior to us, then this new council coming in, we had a few orientation trainings from different organizations, including our own council president did a 2-day training for us as well. So putting it all together, having been an advocate on the outside, I took all of that and building my team. And I'm very proud of the team we've built. And I started that vetting and hiring people before I was inaugurated. So we sort of somewhat hit the ground running. On my team, I have people who've already served in council with other council members, people who have worked for Governor Wolf. So it's not just me, it's a host of experience coming to the table from the rest of my team. And we work in a very lateral fashion, everybody's voice is heard and they have a lot to offer. So that's how I'm approaching. And the next thing we're preparing for this is talking to those who have experience currently on council, checking with people who served before, a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, and then coming out with a strategic plan based on a vision that I have as what I want to do in council.
So you are coming in as chair of the Public Health and Human Services Committee, a very important committee.
Yes.
What are your plans for that?
So, when I was running for office, I had my tagline was a healthy Philadelphia for a brighter, stronger future, right? That is what is going to be operating as in, and another adage is health is wealth. So if you don't have a healthy Philadelphia, looking at all social determinants that determine that healthiness, which includes, not having housing insecurity, making sure we have food and no food deserts, making sure we have quality schools and that are safe, not only physically, but also having a good and solid teaching staff and well-resourced. All of these things add to a healthy Philadelphia, including the physical and mental health of our residents. And that piece becomes very important to me for issues like gun violence. I'm looking at how we look at it as a public health crisis, so we can mobilize different resources for that when you look at it with that lens. And also, how are we imbuing and embedding mental health resources in the work we are doing in the anti-violence arena? So, there are a lot of issues that I care about, but as I said, it's getting Philadelphians in a space where they're able to determine their own destiny, which means you got to be healthy, both physically and mentally, have spaces to go and places to be that allow you to do that. So that's sort of going to be the mission, healthy Philadelphia for a stronger future, and most importantly, addressing health inequities that exist in Philadelphia today.
A few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, the city put on a ballot referendum up, which didn't have any real teeth, but it just said that as Philadelphians, we believe in universal health care. And that's I think that's the ideal for a lot of people, certainly is for me. But, it's a long road to get there. But one of the things that can help us get a little closer, the city already has a network of community health centers.
Right.
Would you favor expanding that network in areas that need it? And this is something we're covering right now, because there's some issues with that. There are people who are for some of these health centers, some people are against them. But generally speaking, do you favor building more community centers throughout the city?
Yes, I definitely want people to have more access. Hopefully these are transit-oriented developments, so people have access to them. But I also would love these health centers, and there is one example of that, coexist with other resources. So on Broad Street, Broad and Morris, I believe, there's a public-private venture with the CHOP and Philadelphia's Health Center. There's a really beautiful library in there. There's a rec center, functioning rec center. There's a large green space outside where families. When I was there, school had just let out. People were playing basketball. People were inside, and intergenerational space the library was, where everybody was working and doing things outside. Parents with strollers, with babies, and a healthcare system which was complementing each other because CHOP has more resources and our health center was able to collaborate with them. That seemed to be such a great model. And this sort of harkens back to when Jim Kenney had tried to, did do community school model. I'm thinking of a health center being part of a community hub where we have different resources co-located. I think then you have a much stronger ability to serve people. It's not obviously possible in every community center, but I think if we can co-locate things where when people come for their health, it's a holistic approach. So I definitely would love more of these done well and done right.
Okay. So we've talked about a few initiatives, but what are your top priorities for this spring, your first session of council?
So everything we do in our office, our team and I have spoken, is going to see how are we addressing poverty? Like whatever we do, is there a line back to addressing that issue? That's the overarching sort of theme we want to keep in what we do. So one of the things I'm very interested is looking at maternal mortality and infant mortality. If we are not setting up our newest residents with the best chances, then we're failing, right? So the fact that there's a lot of racial bias in the healthcare delivery system, which results in a lot of this maternal mortality numbers we're seeing. If it's, data has shown control for all variables. Racism has come to the forefront, which has led to 3 times more Black women dying than anybody else, white women, when they're delivering their babies. And this is not just at the time of delivery, but it's also postpartum. And so I want to really look at, there have been some strides made. For example, Medicaid now will cover 1 year postpartum, right? That's a federal government initiative. But that came because people were starting to agitate about it from local government, from local spaces. And so I'm very interested in looking at doula support that has been demonstrated to help that outcome, to have a better outcome for a mother. So want to work with state in this and with the federal government to see how we mobilize that and how do we mobilize it locally? Are there ways for us to do it in the interim before the federal government works on that? The goal is how do we address those numbers? Those numbers are actually improved. And we have a maternal review committee that is a county level committee, which I think we're the only county that has that. I'm actually going to be meeting with the health department. I haven't met with them yet. They just emailed to set up time. But I want to really explore who are in this space. We have a lot of midwives and others who are, there's a big ecosystem of that currently in Philadelphia. So I want to first talk to them and see, these are what I thought. Are these correct? Is the data correct around this? What is the lived experience of people? And then together come out with some initiatives that would address maternal mortality. So that's one. There's quite a few, but that's a fundamental one that I really want to get going on.
So poverty is probably the number one topic of our show.
Correct.
And my next question was, what should we do about poverty? And it's very refreshing to hear that that's one of your top priorities as well.
That's right. Absolutely.
So I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Home Monitor.
Hi, Denise.
Hi, thank you for joining us, council member. We really appreciate it.
Of course.
Now, the health center at Broad and Morris was my health center when I lived in South Philadelphia, so I know it well. And one of the things that always stood out about it to me was the fact that I could go in there and get good care, but it didn't cover everything.
Mhm.
Like I had to have surgery and I had to find insurance of my own to cover that,
Right.
which is something that not everybody in the city can do. I was fortunate. Is that among the things you're going to be looking at? Because one of the drivers of poverty
Mhm.
that we don't talk about enough is medical debt.
Yeah, medical catastrophe can put you into homelessness like that, right? When you're living paycheck to paycheck. Absolutely. So these are, oh, did you finish your question? I got
Yeah,
all
actually, I
excited.
did. Actually, I did.
Okay. Yes. So looking at the structure of how we are paying for services, how are we covering these things? What is the role of federal government in this? We participate in the exchange for ACA. How is it reaching everybody, right? So I want to have a much more detailed conversation with these health centers to see exactly what services are they getting, what is lacking, how do we fill those gaps, who will fill those gaps. Again, we are a city with, fantastic hospitals around here. And for the life of me, I can't understand how that has not connected to resolve this issue. So I need our partners to step up. Every time you get a Medicaid reimbursement, they're making money off of you and me going to the hospital, right? So I would love to understand how the structure works now, what is the gaps, and who can fill those gaps while we're changing federal policy and state policy around it. We can't wait for that, is the point I'm trying to make, that we know how to do public-private partnerships. We can ask, this is sort of looking at and approximating a pilot of sorts with these nonprofit hospitals, to have them really engaged in delivering top quality care so people don't have to cobble together these things. And the stress you feel when you're sick, you're having to now figure out how you're going to get treatment because one place does this and there's so much of it, and then I need some. That's just crazy. We live in this world. As you started, you said at the beginning that, universal healthcare really should be a right. We should be able to, in this first world country, deliver that without begging for it. So we got to figure out, again, easier said than done. And I'm not the first person saying this. As you know, President Barack Obama was the first person to finally actually get some modicum of healthcare for all. We've still got a ways to go, but we've made some strides. Right now we had our insulin come down to $35 in our Medicaid, and for especially for seniors fixed budget. That's huge, right? So when we look at those kinds of things, I want to be able to understand the structure before I tell you what is the remedy. But these are the ways I'm thinking globally for these remedies.
Okay. Now, you introduced a resolution on Thursday regarding human trafficking.
Yes.
I don't know what the situation is with human trafficking in Pennsylvania, but I've heard that in other places like, say, Atlanta, that it's a really bad thing
Yes.
going on. Is that, are you noticing it as an issue here in Pennsylvania? And if so, what should we be looking for in terms of making sure that we can stop someone from being trafficked if they are?
Yes. So just after I did that resolution, the state put out a set of information around human trafficking, and I'm trying to look for that. I sent it to Kyra, which shows Berks County, out of all our counties, has the highest amount of human trafficking. We are at about 6%. They're at about 12%, or Kyra is checking the actual graphic. There's a graphic around this. We have improved over time. So, but that doesn't, 6% is still 6% of people who are enslaved in this situation. So I would love for us to be 0%, right? And if you remember, Judge Lori Dumas had started the RAP court, which was to make sure minors who were caught up in trafficking were had resources to recover, were not re-victimized as perpetrators, in the legal system. So, and then we have some other resources already. I want to also, as a health initiative, look at where we are with all of that, as encouraging that the state, we would like state attorney general, we would like U.S. attorney, all of them to be involved. What I still find that there's data lacking in understanding what we need to do. So we had talked to the police department before I did that resolution, and they really didn't have a system of capturing that data. One of my concerns that I actually voiced to AUSA in a meeting we had at Enon Baptist Church was, how do you make sure someone who has been trafficked and is treated as a perpetrator is not assessed to be victimized and is not sort of pilloried in the court system twice? Instead of getting support, they're being treated as a criminal, right? So, but they've been trafficked. So where is that data? How do you sort that out between who's the trafficker, who's being trafficked, and where are they? They didn't have a real answer for that. So I want to look at this graphic that they put out. Where did they get that information from? It's based on something. Those numbers come from somewhere. As a scientist, I can tell you, data is only as good as how you're analyzing it and who's collecting it, number one, who's analyzing it, number two, and then how are we presenting it? There's all ways to slice and dice this thing. So I just want to get the heart of it, because I think that this is a heinous, unseen crime that deeply impacts people for the rest of their lives if they've been trafficked once, forever. So here I am, Kyra found information. So this is state of Pennsylvania, human trafficking in Pennsylvania. We'll send you this.
Okay,
286 human trafficking cases over the past 5 years. Now that's just what they were able to look at. That doesn't mean that's how much human trafficking is going on. So that's why I want to look at how they collect their data. Philadelphia is 6% with the, so we are one of the highest counties, but we're at 6%. Berks is 12, Chester is 9, Delaware is 7, Lycoming is 3, Montgomery is 7, is more than us, and Dauphin County is 10. This is Harrisburg. So we got to look at, health in all these hidden dark spaces that nobody goes to.
Okay. Now, before you became a city council person, you had other jobs. You were a deputy mayor. You were the president of NOW. You led a pretty you have a pretty diverse set of experiences. What from those experiences are you hoping to bring to city council? I mean, the healthcare issues are your advocacy for healthcare is kind of obvious, but what other things are you hoping to bring from those experiences?
So one of the other pieces that I'm very excited as a scientist, trained as a scientist, is to have workforce development pipelines from science and technology sector. As we said, poverty is, our overarching theme. So what do we need? We need people to be healthy, and then people to be able to work in jobs that pay a living wage. These health sector, science, technology sector jobs pay very well, right? If you can access them. So one is, I just came from the school district, and I spoke to somebody in the secondary who's sort of oversees the secondary education. I said we need to talk about STEM in a very clear manner. STEAM, because we might want to make sure arts is not sort of left to the wayside, because that's very critical too. But STEM in the sense of science, math, and technology, if we don't make sure children who want to do that, have the aptitude to do that, don't get all the resources, they're not going to be able to access all these jobs that are coming in, right? So as you know, I am a PhD in chemistry from Penn. I then did molecular genetics work at Thomas Jefferson. In my work, I actually was able to see what that pipeline could look like just for the things that I was doing, right? And one of them was a very simple entry point to do glass dishwashing in my laboratory. In order to do that, you have to actually use a very sophisticated instrument to sterilize the glassware, because we were doing DNA work. We had to be completely sterile. And that needs training. That needs, if you mess it up, it's autoclave is under a lot of pressure. It can blow up the whole building, right? So this 10th grade or high school diploma person who was doing glassware washing needed to know how to operate that piece of equipment in order for our lab to function. There's a job right there. When you learn how to do sterilization work, you can get a state level certification. And that allows you to be a sterilization technician in the hospital, which we need these jobs everywhere where we do any kind of invasive work. So if you go down that, in fact, I did this with this young man who came to work to do this glassware work. And he was at loose ends. Mother was worried. I needed someone to do this work. Came in. It transformed his life because he learned how to organize himself in order to function in the lab. He had a high school diploma. And this person then had the ability to go get a job post us and get also more education. If you're in a part of a system like a hospital, they'll pay for you to get more advanced work. So I'm saying all this to say there's a real opportunity at all levels within the science and technology sector to bring people in, even if they're not, a higher level scientist. There's all kinds of work to do. And I want to look very specifically and talk to these companies. How are you doing your hiring when you're coming in and doing a startup or scaling up or doing whatever you're doing, right? How intentional is that to make sure we are using Philadelphia residents to fill those jobs, to get training to fill those jobs, and creating a pipeline? You don't have to know everything. You can have a high school diploma, get your associates, get your bachelor's, and then get a master's. That can all happen while you're working already. So it's sort of the union perspective of earn while you learn kind of thing model. I think we need to make it more pervasive in that sector. So a lot of words to say. We need to have access to high-paying jobs in that sector to address our poverty level.
Now, are you thinking about a possible plan to connect with the school district so that can happen?
Yes. So I know the school district already is doing a lot of things. So I just don't know about everything, right? So I want to go in and have them tell me what is happening. Do they have existing pipelines? Who they have it with? And listen, this is not just today's children. This is about children in 10 years later. So way past, when I'll be here, to make sure that we have established those pathways, because we are going to be a science and technology center for quite some time to come. And how do we access that space with a future sort of plan for it? Current and future. So I'm going to talk to Dr. Watlington and his team to understand that. And then remember, we have our own medical centers. We all have a thriving, sort of healthcare industry right here, government industry. What are pipelines there? I don't know that. So I need to find out how we gainfully employ people with ability to grow and improve.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're still listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And council member, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Have a great day. And as our mayor says, one Philadelphia.
I am muted there. So we'd like to thank Councilmember Nina Ahmad for joining us on the program. And I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And I'd also like to bring back Lance Haver here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thank you for a very great interview. It was very interesting. I guess I didn't realize so much of her background.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear a council member right away say poverty is one of the most important things I'm looking at. It's good to hear that's high on her agenda. So, Lance, we have some more reporting from you about SEPTA, and you gave us a little preview, the not great, the bad. So, tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Before we do that, I just wanted to highlight the council members' support for the health center, which is an issue that we've been following. I know that she talked about expanding the health centers and the role that they're playing, and a little bit about community schools and health centers. But I thought really one of the important things that came out of that interview was a very concrete level of support for the health center being built in the Northeast, which again, there are 50 health centers in the city of Philadelphia. 10 of them are city health centers. The other 40 are federally qualified health centers. And of the 50, there is only one in Northeast Philadelphia. And because of the changing demographics where wealthy people are moving into Center City and Northern Liberties, and as far south as Washington Avenue and 22nd Street, which I have to say, older people like me, when we get told that they're building $500,000 condos at 22nd and Washington Avenue, say that must be a different Washington Avenue. That can't be the Washington Avenue with all the auto body shops and all the supply stores and all the vacant lots. It's got to be some other Washington Avenue. It turns out no, that's now a desirable neighborhood. So a lot of people are being displaced, and some of those people who are being displaced are moving to the Northeast, and it's become the home for the largest number of people who immigrate into Philadelphia are residing in the Northeast. So the demands for another health center are very real. And it was reassuring to hear the council member say, yes, she supports building another health center there. So I'm looking forward to some follow-up with that. Maybe some of the people who are saying that they need the health center will be in touch with her, and we'll find out what happened. I know, Larry, that you had contacted Councilwoman it's in her district, Lozada, to find out what her position was. Did we hear back yet?
We have not heard back yet.
Right. So hopefully we'll hear back in the next few days. We'll be able to report on that as well. On SEPTA. So this becomes one of those never-ending stories. And let me just give the background again. There are 4 things that are currently happening with SEPTA. One, SEPTA is hoarding cash. They have $500 million in what they call their Fair Stabilization Fund. Now, that money comes from the COVID dollars. Again, there are many of us who are upset with President Biden. There are many of us who are upset about COVID. But one of the things that we cannot ignore is that President Biden and the Democratic-controlled House and Senate released a tremendous amount of money to help cities and state and public transit systems during the COVID period. Much of that money has been put aside in what gets called rainy day funds or fair stabilization funds. The state of Pennsylvania is actually sitting on billions of dollars. And I thought Denise's question about healthcare debt was apropos. New York City, and again, wherever anyone is on Mayor Adams, I don't think anyone would describe Mayor Adams as a long-term progressive. I think that would be a stretch. But Mayor Adams has now decided to do what progressive cities are doing, and that is release some of the COVID dollars that have been set aside to deal with the problems from COVID to buy up old medical debt and release it. And I was a little bit unsure whether the council member who was on the health committee was aware that the other cities were doing that, and what a successful strategy that's been. Just as a concrete example again, $1 can buy up as much as $1,000 in medical debt. The city taking $1 million could buy up $10 million in medical debt, free it, and that, of course, helps people live fuller lives, lifts people out of poverty, and the money that doesn't have to go to the bill collectors. And the truth is that almost all of these medical bills are sold by the institutions to people whose private business it is to collect debt. And the only people who get rich out of this are the debt collectors, the hospitals, the doctors, the people who have actually provided the service rarely own that debt any longer. They've sold it for hundreds of pennies on a dollar. And then the bill collectors try and collect $5 on 100 and make this humongous profit. And the city of New York, of Pittsburgh, Toledo, Ohio, and other places is using the COVID dollars to buy up the debt and free it. So I'm hoping that as she holds here, as the council member holds hearings and thinks about her answer to Denise, that that's going to be on the agenda. So again, focusing back on SEPTA, one of the things SEPTA has done is taken those COVID dollars. They've not improved the bus service. They've not made it cleaner. They've not done any of the things that I think riders would like them to do, but they decided to put the money into the Fare Stabilization Fund. And uniquely, they're not disclosing how much is in it. The only way I can say it's $500 million is by a projection. So every year there's a budget that SEPTA has to put forward. The SEPTA board has to vote on it. There are public hearings. Every year I go to those hearings and I ask specific questions. And one of the specific questions I ask is, how much is in the Fare Stabilization Fund? And it's been increasing by $100 million a year. SEPTA's management, the financial people, do this very unique thing where they say, well, we don't know how much money is in the Fare Stabilization Fund until we close the books for this year. And we can't close the books for this fiscal year until we pass the budget. So we can't tell you. So, well, how much was in it last year? Well, last year it was 300 million. Well, how much do you project it will be in this year? Well, we can't make a projection because we don't know. But when we extrapolate 300 2 years ago, 400 last year, it's safe to project it's going to be 500 million this year. But that is a projection. It's an extrapolation. It is not a hard number. I believe it's the right number, but if someone were to say to me, hey, it's really only 475 million, why are you misleading people? I would say, I'm not trying to mislead people. I'm just basing that number on extrapolation. So that's one issue. The second issue is SEPTA has what's called a structural deficit. And what that means is the existing subsidies and the existing revenues that come in from the riders, from the advertising, from SEPTA's investments is not sufficient to cover the expense of running SEPTA. And SEPTA projects that that structural deficit is about $245 million. The third thing is last year, Governor Shapiro put in a budget a change in the sales tax allocation that would fully fund SEPTA, close the structural deficit, and set money aside for other public transit systems. Those of us who are in Philadelphia, who love the city, who ride SEPTA, and people who are fortunate like me to get my rides paid for by the lottery, because now that I'm a senior citizen, I get to ride for free. Although I wish people wouldn't buy the lottery tickets, but as long as they're going to buy them, I'm glad people my age can ride SEPTA for free. But we're not the only system. There's a system in Altoona. There's a system in Lehigh Valley. There's a system in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, system in Pittsburgh, in Dauphin County, in Harrisburg, in York. So there's systems across the state, and every one of them would benefit from a change in the sales tax allocation that would go to support public transit. Governor Shapiro promised to do that. I shouldn't say promised. Put that in the budget last year and then did not advocate for it. When the governor didn't advocate for it, it did not pass. He's put it in the budget again this year, held a press conference in Philadelphia, which is a unique situation because it's not the Philadelphia legislators that aren't supporting it. It's the rest of the state. So it's kind of questionable why Governor Shapiro came to Philadelphia to announce support once again for public transit. Had he gone to Altoona or Pittsburgh or Shamokin or some other part where there's public transit is also struggling, it perhaps would have made more sense because that would have called attention to the people outside of Philadelphia who need public transit. And the other thing is how much of that money goes into local businesses. I wrote about for our newsletter At every SEPTA board meeting, there's a consent vote that gives away literally tens of millions of dollars in contracts. Often that's no bid contracts. They're to consulting firms, they're to engineers, they're to builders. You name the type of company, they're getting money from SEPTA. I'm hoping that most of those businesses are located in Pennsylvania. I'm hoping that many of them are located in Philadelphia. Of course, because the SEPTA board doesn't ask any questions, we don't know the answers to that. But assuming that all of these companies know that if public transit fails and has to cut back on services, they're also going to lose revenues. You would think that those businesses would be joining people and government in lobbying the rest of the state for public transit. And you would think the governor would have gone to one of these small businesses, which is getting $50, $100 million a year from public transit, and held the press conference there and said, unless we fund public transit, we're going to have to lay these people off. So that's the second part. The third part, of course, is an old story, which is who's on the SEPTA board and how little control the city has. Now, the city is 80% of the system. There's a city transit division, which is the buses, the Broad Street line, the what we call the subway surface cars. Sometimes they get called the Green Line. All of those are inside the city. The city transit division is 80% of the riders. The city is 80% of the local match. If there's not a local match, Harrisburg doesn't send any money. And even though the overwhelming majority of people who ride the regional rails are not Philadelphians, Philadelphia remains 90% of the local match for the regional rail lines. Now, some of us do ride it. When I lived in East Oak Lane and I worked in City Hall, I rode the regional rail line. For those people who've never been on it, if your station has some place to sit when it's cold, some place to get a drink of water, a convenient stop, it's a wonderful thing because the trains run on a schedule. You can look up. I should say they're supposed to run on a schedule. The buses and the subways hopefully will soon run on schedules, but for the most part, you have no idea when the bus is coming, so it's really hard to plan. The train is, if I catch the 8:27, I'll get in at 8:47, and it's knowable. So that's that third part. And the fourth part is the longtime chair of the SEPTA board, Pat Dion, who was a longtime funder of Republican candidates, who was a real estate developer, who actually owned one of a shopping center where SEPTA stopped to bring people to the stores and pick people up from the stores. He has left, and there will be a new makeup of the SEPTA board. So those are the four things that we're looking at. While these things are going on, SEPTA is continuing to talk about what they call the bus revolution. And if we could run that video so people could see the two things that the SEPTA board acknowledges. And I know I have said it, but I really think it's helpful to hear the chairman who's stepping down, the Republican fundraiser and supporter of Republican Trump candidates, say SEPTA is going off the fiscal cliff, but here we are going to spend millions of dollars to change the bus routes anyway. So if we could run that.
Network redesign and the possible service cut that we are considering in order to address our looming fiscal cliff. Leslie, we'll take a moment to speak. We'll speak to each before we continue. Want to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. So regarding the bus network redesign, our proposed bus network redesign represents more than 2 years of public outreach and revision to the plan.
To approve this, or not approve it. So, Mike?
So Chairman Dion, I would like to make a motion that the adoption of tariffs and supplements to the existing tariffs related to the bus revolution project be tabled and be taken up in a special meeting to be held 2 weeks from today.
Second. Motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. All right, next item.
So this is not the first, not the second, but the third time that the bus revolution has been postponed. There were a number of riders who stood up and said, don't do it. We don't have the funding in place. It's kind of, I don't know the right adjective. There's some appropriate adjective to say We don't have enough money to keep the buses running, to keep the trains running. We're talking about a fiscal cliff, but we're going to vote to spend millions of dollars to change the bus routes. And then if we don't get the money, we're going to spend millions of dollars more to cut those bus routes. There's got to be a correct adjective for it. Crazy, nonsensical, spendthrift, all those seem to fit, but not quite enough. So there was one rider group that supports it. They continue to point out that for their members, they'll get better service. But they were the only group to support it. All the other riders were opposed to it. They've shown up at hearings. They've been opposed to it. It didn't really matter. But what mattered was the council majority leader, Catherine Gilmore Richardson, showed up in person. Now, I'm somebody who has been attending SEPTA board meetings from 1978. And it is incredibly rare to have a council member show up in person to talk about the needs of their constituents with SEPTA. The only other elected official I ever saw do it was former Mayor Street, who showed up to say, don't make layoffs, don't close the bus lines, keep it going, and let's find the funding. Other than that, I have never seen an elected official. Even those elected officials who say they support it will send staff, will send somebody else. But the council, the majority leader of council, showed up in person and was very eloquent. She said, thank you to SEPTA. You've been making changes, you've been listening to us, but you haven't done enough. And you ought to recognize that you're getting ready to make these massive changes before the new mayor has had any input. So the mayor makes one Philadelphia County appointment to the board. She hasn't made that appointment. She hasn't told SEPTA what she thinks of the bus revolution. Before Council President Johnson has had any input. Now, those of us who are following this issue know that he held hearings and really called SEPTA into account for not doing enough outreach. But he hasn't made his appointment to the SEPTA board. And how insulting it is for SEPTA to say, we know there's a new mayor, we know there's a new council president, we know there's a new head of SEPTA's committee of transportation, we know that the city's 80% of the funds, 80% of the system, and we're going to go ahead and put this down people's throats anyway, even though we don't know if we have enough money to keep the system operating. So again, in the category of what's the correct adjective to describe that, I don't know. But the council majority leader made it very clear that she wanted more time. She wanted more time for the new mayor to speak. She wanted more time for the new council to speak. And she thought that as SEPTA had been working with her to try and do the outreach, that it was not enough. And I want to give a concrete example of what that means when we say not enough. Many of us in the city of Philadelphia are active in our community organizations, the RCOs. These are registered community organizations. And there is a network of community organization called the Crosstown Coalition that meets. And I was at the meeting presenting Hall Monitor and asking if we could possibly be the news media for the RCOs. One of the things that came up at the meeting was, had SEPTA presented the bus revolution to explain to all the RCOs what it was going to mean to each neighborhood. For example, I'm on the board of the Hawthorne Empowerment Coalition, which is the Hawthorne neighborhood group. Now, Hawthorne is a relatively small neighborhood from Broad Street to 11th Street, from South Street to Washington Avenue. So we're not a tremendously large neighborhood. But for us, the cuts in the bus revolution in the first rendition were tremendously devastating. It did away with our 45, it did away with our 32, it did away with our 27, and the 4 bus, which runs up and down Broad Street, was going to cut back from once every 7 minutes to once every half an hour because they thought everyone in our neighborhood should ride the subway. Now, again, we are fortunate enough to have State Representative Waxman, State Senator Saval, and all the neighborhood groups speak out against it, and they had to change it. But the RCOs, the coalition of RCOs, the Crosstown Coalition, had wanted SEPTA to come and present to them what these cuts meant so that every neighborhood group could stand up and say, well, here's the important bus in our neighborhood. What's going on with that? SEPTA refused to send anyone. They said, no, you have to come to us. We're not going to go to you to explain it. And this again becomes one of those things where it's very confusing. Most of us who do community outreach, most of us who want to have a connection to the communities, look for opportunities to go where people are already organized, where people are already represented, and make sure we have our say. SEPTA, on the other hand, didn't want to do that. They wanted to have people come to them. And there's a very stark difference. The community organizations are duly elected. Most of these people are volunteers, but they're very knowledgeable of what goes on in their neighborhood. If we stop someone from, let's say, the Germantown organization, said, well, what bus is important to you? They would be able to tell us. If we go to a stop, the person at the stop would certainly know what's important to them, but they wouldn't necessarily know what's important to their neighbor. So that's an indication of how SEPTA isn't doing outreach. And they say that they're going to vote in 2 weeks, and maybe they will and maybe they won't. What's a little surprising is they didn't postpone it to the next board meeting. The board meets once a month. They're trying to slip it into a meeting where almost nobody attends because it's not a board meeting, and usually it doesn't matter what, that's a discussion meeting. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what the new mayor wants to do in terms of SEPTA board members and what the new chairman wants to do. There is a political change. No longer is the SEPTA board controlled by a Republican funder of Republicans and Trump candidates, and now is being led by a Democrat. Whether that will actually change how SEPTA operates, whether it's friendlier to riders or not, we don't know. And I recognize that there are a lot of people who disagree with me about Chairman Dion's role. They say that he helped save SEPTA from bankruptcy. I would point out SEPTA's facing bankruptcy. They say, well, he hired more police. And I will say he made it necessary to hire more police because he didn't fully staff the police. They say, well, he's made improvements to the system. I say most of us who ride the L or ride the subway, who get on the bus, don't see those improvements. We actually see the system as being worse. And Inga Saffron, who's the architectural critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I am a fan of hers. Now, again, everyone has their own thoughts about her, but she just wrote today about what the subway surface cars look like and what the stops look like. And she just said, what is going on here? There is such filth that we can't use it. And in that, again, I'm not saying that the leadership at SEPTA caused the problems. I am saying that there has to be a recognition that desperate people do desperate things. And if we have homeless people, if we have people struggling with addiction, if we have people who don't have enough to eat, we shouldn't be surprised that they do whatever they can to survive. And part of that is being in the subway concourse at the train stations, riding the systems. To be an ostrich and make believe that there aren't repercussions of an unfair structure of society really means that you're failing to serve the public. So that's the report. I'm hoping to have other news in a couple of weeks. It's an ongoing issue. By the way, the other issue that I am currently working on is we saw a newly elected city council member stand up at city council first session and say he doesn't work for the mayor, doesn't work for the council president, doesn't even work for the taxpayers because he's a preacher. He answers only to God. And this is someone who ran as a progressive. So I'm reaching out to the party that supported him and asking if that is their position. As somebody who believes there should be a separation between religion and government, I would be horrified if a right-wing preacher who was anti-woman, who was anti-gay, who was anti-whatever, stood up and said that. He doesn't care about the Constitution. He doesn't care about the governor or the mayor or the taxpayers. He's there to answer to what he believes God is saying. I would find that horrific. And just because someone shares my political beliefs doesn't change the fact that someone who says, I don't answer to my constituents, I don't answer to the voters, I answer to God, is fundamentally backwards and anti-democratic, and something I think we should ask about.
Well, Lance, thank you very much for that report. We're going to be keeping an eye on the SEPTA situation because it's so crucial to so many people. And we'll be looking forward to the other work you're working on. And about that, Denise, we were at that meeting.
Yes, because we always seem to be at the meetings where people are pontificating or doing things that just makes you scratch your head for a few minutes.
Yeah.
What, was there any response? Did anyone challenge him?
No.
Not on the floor. After the meeting, I had a lot of people coming up to me and saying, what was that? And there was somebody who was keeping track, and I heard the secondhand, of all the norms that were violated during that speech. So it was definitely a very odd first stated meeting for Councilman O'Rourke, who was on the program a couple weeks ago. We spoke to him, and it's definitely strange.
It was the singing that got me.
Yeah. The singing didn't bother me as much as what Lance is talking about by saying you're not listening to the taxpayers. I just think that's a strange remark for a council member to make, and definitely needs to be followed up upon.
Well, I do think.
I'm sorry. It's the kind of thing that if I am a voter and I'm hearing this, there are some communities that are going to be like, oh, that's great. You listen to God, terrific. We'll follow you. And then you're going to have some communities who are going to be like, does that mean that as far as you're concerned, what I need from you is going to be predicated on whether or not it's considered godly to you? He really needs to clarify that.
It's very open to interpretation as to what that means.
So again, in full disclosure, I voted for him, and I have supported the Working Families Party. I think it's important, at least for me, to say both things can be true. I can believe that there needs to be an independent political voice in the city, but that doesn't mean I believe it should be God's voice. I don't believe anyone hears God completely. I'm not wise enough to know why God speaks to different people in different voices. I'm just sure that anyone who says, I'm the only one who really hears God and all the other people who hear God are having delusions of grandeur, is somebody who I think needs to be questioned.
Yep.
And, maybe he got carried away. It's an exciting day, big movement, big victory to have both of them, both working family candidates in office at the same time. Sometimes, we all get excited sometimes. We all make misstatements sometimes. What I'm wondering is, will he clarify it and say, I was overly enthusiastic? And I know many people, it's their faith that leads them to try and serve people. And perhaps that's what he was trying to say. It's my faith and my belief that leads me to want to serve people. But serving people in office means just that, serving the voters.
And I'm going to talk to him about it tomorrow, see if I can get a comment from him that we would put in our newsletter for Friday. And it looks like we're just about out of time. So next week on the show, we will have another new council member, Rue Landau, will join us on the program. And we'll have more talk about what's going on in the city and in city council. A lot coming up, and it's going to happen quick. Before we know it, budget will be upon us, which is one of our favorite times of year here. So we want to thank everybody for watching us, and we'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.